Good evening. Today is July 8th, 2015. My caller is Minister David Ben Ahayah. This message is for the private man acting as the Halton Police Chief, Stephen J. Tanner. Hello, Stephen. I wish that we could be speaking under better circumstances and such as, unfortunately, I have some pretty serious things to talk to you about today. On June 12th, your Milton courts claim that Minister David Ben Ahayah, my husband, is required to be at their courts to show surety for a person known as David Pollock, a dead-in-law fiction. David, my husband, the living man, provided his lawful excuse before them on the 11th to over 300 men and women, yourself included, that work in the justice system, so as it's called. Kind of laughable. He provided that lawful excuse as to why he should not have to be in court. He was diligent in making sure that everyone knew his position. He's talked to you many times. His lawful excuse is that he's not a person, he's a man. And whether or not that sounds strange to you, really honestly isn't of any force or effect. Let me tell you why. The Canadian Interpretations Act lists a person as being a corporation. So the person includes corporations. Now, the word includes means only that which follows. It boxes it in, kind of like a little cage cell that you've got my husband in right now. Also like those little witness boxes in your courtroom where they can sit in there, they can be seen, but they can't really talk or do anything. It's kind of what that little box does. It boxes it in, and it includes only that which follows. So when a person includes a corporation, it means that a person is a corporation only. I'm not dead, neither is my husband. He's a loving, flesh and blood man. The Black's Law 2nd edition also defines a person as a corporation or a body's politic. I don't subscribe to that, and I don't accept that. My Bible, my God, tells me not to accept or show respect of persons. What right do you have to intimidate a Christian minister, to violate his faith and beliefs? What right do you have to discriminate against a Christian or anyone for any religious belief? Where do you think that right comes from for you? Where do you get off on that? Section 32, furthermore, of your Charter of Rights and Freedoms states in no uncertain terms that the purpose of this charter is to make clear that the charter only applies to governments and not to individual men, women, or businesses. Then you go on to Section 52, and it says that the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and any law that is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution is, to the extent of the inconsistency, of no force or effect. So if your law, or code as I should say, states that the charter and the code subsequent only apply to agents of the government, and David has more than removed any assumption and has been extremely diligent in removing your assumption and the assumption of over 300 men and women in the Halton area in the Milton courthouse, that he is in fact a person, that he is any assumption that he is a person, and that he is in fact not one, that he is a man. He's been diligent in removing your assumptions on that. At this point, you're just blindly ignoring it, and that's not acceptable. Furthermore, he gained an agreement with you, Sir Stephen J. Tanner. He sent you a video on June 12th, gaining agreement with you, stating that the court system that would be putting forth a warrant, if they so chose, would be acting in fraud. He laid out the evidence as to why that's the case. And he brought you into awareness of the fact that any arrest further to that point would just be furthering the intimidation and the harassment and the obstruction of ministry and the common nuisance that's been going on to him, to myself, to our family. You did not reply to that video. He sent a confirmation of the tacit consent on June 24th, way after the fact of the time had elapsed for you to counter that video. Coincidentally, out of those 300 emails, there are quite a few counters on that private linked video that only the private members that receive the email link to the lawful excuse could have access to that. There has been multiple views, and yet no one has returned it. In fact, that's the only thing the prosecution or the Crown was required to do, required by their own code, when provided with a lawful excuse, is to rebut it. If they choose not to rebut it, you cannot move forward. That's in your code. You should know that as a chief of police. They should know that as a Crown attorney. But it wasn't rebutted, and the time elapsed and dragged way past. And yet yesterday morning, on June 7th, 2015, when my husband and I were on our way to work, unmarked cars pulled up and surrounded my husband, and ununiformed officers, or men who claimed to be officers, came and started trying to detain him and to kidnap him and put him in the back of a black car, and no one would identify themselves to me. I asked what was going on. They said that they were police officers, yet there was no identification provided until very, very late after, when David was already in a car, already detained, already cuffed. Pretty sure that happened out of order. You got a plainclothes police officer trying to make an arrest, and I demand some identification to make sure you're not just some random street thug, and I don't get any information. That seems pretty sketchy to me. On top of that, while I was trying to ascertain this information and to stay with my husband, your officers gave me these fine bruises. See if you can see them on there. There's one of the bruises there. I'll have better pictures that I will take for you as well and provide to you in a separate video that I do more for myself. This one is for David. Stephen, I'm not sure if you're married. I'm assuming that you probably are, but then again, I don't really know you. I have never for one day been apart from my husband. From the single day we met, our very first date, we have seen each other every single day, henceforth. Until yesterday, when your unmarked goons forced him into a car, restrained me on the ground, and drove him away. He's locked in a cage right now, Stephen, and I can't see him. I haven't been able to talk to him for 2 days. I saw him for about a minute and a half today in the courtroom, and we weren't allowed to communicate. I was able to shout "and I love you" to him as he was being dragged out by more officers. Do you understand the kind of harm that you're doing to my family? And not to mention the obstruction that you're causing my ministry by detaining him unlawfully and without any valid reason? You, Stephen J. Turner, were made more than aware that if anything like this was to happen, any further arrest, any further intimidation, any further harassment, you would be privately liable because these are your agents and ultimately they answer to you. The court issues a warrant if it's in blatant fraud, and if it's in fraud as you know it to be, which you were brought into awareness of the fraud, and you still acted on that fraudulent warrant. You had every right to say no as chief of police. You had every right to tell your officers to stand down and use discretion, but you didn't, because you're all in it for the money. And I tell you what, I'm holding you privately liable. My property has been stolen from me. My husband has been kidnapped from me. You are causing me grievous harm. You're causing my family grievous harm. And you were warned that if this continued, you would be held liable. You were made aware of the facts diligently. You refused to do anything about it, and your negligence and your refusal to act is going to cost you. Because now I'm holding you privately liable, and I will be bringing a lawsuit against you, and I will be bringing a lawsuit against every man, woman that was involved. From the prosecutors and the judges, down to the filing clerk, down to your officers, and yourself. Everybody that was involved in this criminal activity, and this blatant fraud and intimidation, obstruction of justice, obstruction of ministry, not obstruction of justice, obstruction of ministry, a common nuisance, everybody will be held liable. When I bring these laws into your awareness, see that I'm not doing them as to make use of your codes and simply acting as a loving watchman to you. You're harming my family, you're harming my ministry, you've kidnapped my ministry, you've breached an agreement that you have. And I'm bringing you into awareness of the fact that if you do not stop, you're opening yourself up to damages in your own code. It would be my heavy suggestion that you do something to get my husband out of that jail cell. He does not belong there. I was sitting in court today and I watched a pedophile, a man being accused of having child pornography, get released out on bail after watching kids in a park. And yet my minister husband is being detained for a traffic ticket. This is religious discrimination, pure and simple, otherwise it would not be happening. I pray that you review these facts, you find them to be true, you do your diligence, and you do the right thing. You release my husband, you reunite my family, and you protect us from further obstruction, from further intimidation, from further harassment, and from further nuisance. I pray that God blesses you and your family and keeps you all safe.